President Trump's retweet of a video showing a supporter shouting "white power" twice. The president thanking the, quote, great people in the video, and then hours later, he deleted it. Joining us now is CNN political analyst David Gregory and CNN political commentator Angela Rye, former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus. So in a statement, the White House press secretary Judd Deere actually said he didn't hear the statement made on the video. What he did see was tremendous enthusiasm from his many supporters. What's interesting, Angela, is that nowhere in that statement is the white power statement denounced. Nowhere does the White House try to remove itself from people chanting white power who are supporting the president.
Yeah, and I think that it would be unfortunate if any of us were surprised by that. Donald Trump started his campaign in 2016 based on hate and fear mongering. And people would say there were dog whistles involved, and many of us said there were bullhorns involved. So I hope that there aren't too many of us who are surprised at Donald Trump endorsing or embracing in some way people who believe in white power ideology. I have for a long time said that Donald Trump is a racist and at the very least traffics in racism. And I think that is exactly what we're seeing in this country. It is not new to us that the country is divided, but someone who would exacerbate this type of division, particularly in a climate like this, I think is really toxic and dangerous. You see this same person post FBI wanted posters of, young Black people who want to take down statues of people who they believe are also white supremacists. Instead of spending his time trying to get coronavirus in check to ensure that his potential voting base and above all Americans can survive. So this is this president, and this is exactly why I refuse to claim him.
I have to tell you, the president of the United States disseminating a message of white power, an explicit message of white power. He denies he saw it, but he still disseminated an explicit message of white power. That should always be stunning to Americans, no matter what they have seen in the past from this president. And David Gregory, that aside, it's the dissonance. It's the dissonance right now with that message to what the rest of America seems to be saying in words and in action. Mississippi overnight voting to remove the Confederate symbol from its state flag.
Mississippi, Princeton University taking a step that it resisted about 4 years ago, removing Woodrow Wilson's name from its heralded school on foreign affairs. It's complete dissonance. And I think, I agree with what was said about the president. I mean, he not only, he doesn't take any opportunity to distance himself from a claim of white power. They dance around whether or not he knew what he was, that he heard it, this kind of thing. It's very simple as a leader to get up and say, I reject it. I don't want anything to do with that sentiment. He doesn't do that. So at the very least, he plays kind of, loose with all of this. And again, he is separate from a conversation that's going on without him. About the question of race and equity in the country, that citizens are having, that corporations are having, that all kinds of organizations are having, that activists are leading, that he's really on the sidelines and worse during all of that.
On the sidelines and also actively working to protect these statues, right? That this is the focus, Angela, is protecting a statue. As opposed to, as you both pointed out, as opposed to protecting Americans on a daily basis, not just from issues of systemic racism, but also from the coronavirus.
Which, in a lot of ways we can acknowledge now has some disproportionate impact based on systemic oppression and racism in this country. So again, I say, this is not surprising to me. He has verbatim said racist things. He has targeted Black women in elected office. He's targeted our own April Ryan in the press room. These are not just suggestive. They are rooted in what he really believes. The fact that he has been able to distance himself from people who have said racist things at his rally, the types of racism he's engaged in, calling Black men thugs, calling NFL players who protest SOBs, none of this is by mistake. And so I think think it's really incumbent upon us to be responsible with the platforms we all have and acknowledge him for what he is. He was, when he began his campaign, racist. He was, after he was elected, racist, and he continues to be exactly who he was. Now, we can say, well, everybody else in the country is changing, but the fact of the matter is, people have called for this long before the last person was killed by police. We have been fighting this fight for 400 plus years, right? And so at some point, we all have to take responsibility, whether it was implicit or explicit. We have a racism problem in this country, and Donald Trump is just splashing around in it.
Yeah, you need to be able to say it's wrong in and of itself. Tim Scott said
100%.
yesterday it's wrong in and of itself. Whether or not it's working is a separate matter, David. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I think, but there's the larger question that you phrased about dealing with the pandemic. In a political context, in an election year, Adam Nagorny has a piece in the New York Times who quotes an independent voter who says every time the president opens his mouth, he causes trouble. And that's turning this particular voter off. And I think that's such a distillation of so many of the problems for President Trump. But at the moment, the fact that it's a question of basic competence, can the federal government, working with state officials, protect people from a pandemic? A lack of competence in government engenders a swift backlash politically. And I think that's what the president is facing here, because in the middle of all of this, not only is he not constructive on this conversation about race, he's quite the opposite. He's also not dealing with job number one, which is protecting people.
Chris Christie with George Stephanopoulos yesterday, David Gregory, we don't have the exact bite right now, basically said the president's losing because of what he's saying, the way he's saying it, and what he's doing. That's a pretty broad condemnation from someone who supported you in your last election.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, there's just a collapse that you're seeing. But again, it's a mistake politically to count Donald Trump out. So many of us did that back in 2016. There is still a path, if you look at the economy, if there's some kind of rebound where he could build on a base to try to put together some kind of election victory. But at the moment, we see him collapsing around competence, around swing voters, around minorities for sure, young people, and those suburban voters who he relied on before. You look at that battleground polling, last time we talked, a new slate of battleground polls in states that he won. We're seeing that support collapse. And to me, the biggest indicator is his own behavior, his own erratic behavior. It's always been erratic, but you see him take on a kind of siege mentality because I think of his fear of his political standing right now.
David Gregory, Angela Rye, thank you both very much for being with us this morning. Appreciate the discussion. Thanks.